Welcome to Rising Tide Startups, where today's most exciting solopreneurs share their startup stories. They also deliver tangible strategies that they would implement personally if starting their business over today. Each episode is a startup masterclass. Make sure you take notes. Take it away, Kevin.
This is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of Rising Tide Startups, and my guest today is Marek Zmysłowski. That's probably not even close to correct, but please forgive me, but maybe you can correct it for our audience.
No, you actually pronounced it perfectly for someone that does it for the first time. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Hey, it's great to have you, and we're just anxious to hear your backstory, but tell our listeners a little bit about Marek.
Yes, so my name is Marek, as you already know. I'm Polish born, although last 8 years, 2012, last 8 years, I've been 100% professionally focused on building online businesses in sub-Saharan Africa, which is a pretty well specified niche. My business story in 1 minute is that I have dropped out of university on my first year because I wanted to build a huge business empire, because I was, reading TechCrunch and watching CNN, and I knew what's been happening to Facebook. My first part of my business life was that I built a big financial brokerage in Poland. That was before the crisis, so everyone was making a lot of money in the finance sector. And then I also had my first huge crisis in 2008, where I not only made all the money, at first I made my first million there, but then I lost everything and I had even bigger debt than the money I had in the beginnings. And at that stage, I already knew that I kind of want to go into startups, because I saw those CNN coverages of those hipsters sitting in Starbucks in Silicon Valley drinking soya latte and just, writing on their fancy white keyboards and making millions. And I figured if they can do it, I can do it as well.
Yeah, we all do that. Every American sits in Starbucks and taps on their Mac keyboard.
Then I realized it's not that easy. But that's what drove me really into startups, as funny as it sounds. But I fell in love with the concept of disrupting an ecosystem and disrupting an industry by introducing new technology, because that's how fortunes are made, really. When you look at when oil was discovered, then the first industrial revolution, second, etc. And I was trying to find a business model for me when not too many people would like to build a competition for me. And essentially, I built a marketplace for funeral services because none of the youngsters, none of the teenagers I knew that were good with computers wanted to have a funeral business.
Right. Yeah.
And
it's not a high
not
a high demand.
Yeah. There. Not at all. Super hard. Essentially, it was like booking.com just for funeral homes. It's also travel just one way, and people are looking for the services online. And then at some point, I just met guys which are running a big online company called Rocket Internet. They're not that well known in the US, but when you look at their sites, they're like top three. There's Alibaba, there's Amazon, and there's this huge e-commerce group called Rocket Internet, which is on 4 continents. They're just not that known because they have a different brand in every country. And at that time, they were trying to prepare and raise money and go into Africa and build the African version of Amazon, booking.com, Uber, Delivery Hero, and so on and so on. And they figured that apparently my experience in building technology business, first in Poland, which is not as technologically advanced as the US, at least that's where we were, a couple years ago. And then in funeral business, that my experience actually can be relevant to go and build online business in Nigeria, because that's where we started. And so I got an offer I couldn't refuse if a company like this offers you this. And the offer was pretty simple. This is our budget. I think they've raised some crazy amounts of money back then. It was like $500 million to open 7 online verticals: e-commerce, classifieds, marketplace, food delivery, ride hailing, and a couple other, and online travel. And I was responsible for the online travel vertical. And the case was very simple. You're going to be paid almost nothing, but if you deliver the results, you're going to earn your shares. And long story short, the company went public. We did an IPO last year on New York Stock Exchange. Africa gave me the craziest experience in my life. Going IPO was the first one. Being on the Interpol Most Wanted list was the second one. At least was the second one, which is kind of what great summary of what Africa gives you. It kind of is addictive. It gives you all kinds of experience, and you just love it.
There is
nevertheless.
Isn't there an expression called TIA, like TIA? It just stands for This is Africa. Yeah. It's like a catch-all phrase for everything, that happens there. So
That's
good,
correct.
bad,
And
and
that's the most
indifferent.
annoying thing.
Yeah.
When you're a manager and you're managing a team and the results are not there, and one of your employees tells you, I mean, this is Africa. Then that's like, how do you deal with such an excuse? Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that it's interesting because I mean, I've traveled quite a bit myself and actually done business on different continents as well. But I think that the difficulty is just the clash of culture. Like, you know, the Polish culture, the German culture, the kind of the Western Europe culture, at least in the northern part of Western Europe, you know, you know, they're pretty time bound, they're pretty structured. And then you go to Africa and it's like, you know, just almost like watches are obsolete. You know, the whole idea that
Yeah,
you know, just
that's yeah.
well, you know, it's just running on a different time and a different expectation, and it's difficult sometimes to make that shift.
Correct. So there are two jokes about it. That your driver tells you that your taxi driver tells you that you have the watch, but he has the time. And you got to remember, like, Africa is 54 countries, hundreds of tribes, thousands of languages. Just in
Yep.
South Africa, you have 13 official languages.
Right.
And in Nigeria, there are many tribes that even talk to each other in English because otherwise they don't know each other's languages. And there's a joke in Nigeria that my Nigerian friend told me, what is the difference between a tourist and a racist in Nigeria? And his answer was a week.
Wow.
And this, I'm going to tell you the reason. It's so easy to become maybe not a racist, but a bigot or xenophobe, because when you enter a country with a totally different culture, culture is basically a set of rules that you're so used to that they're in your skin,
Right.
on a subconscious level. So the moment you enter a new culture and everything happens in a different way, people behave in a different way, it hits your subconscious. You become frustrated, irritated, because it's not how it's supposed to be. So that frustration is then amplified, and you can become a xenophobe or a bigot or a racist even. So yeah, that was a big challenge. And one thing that I've learned in order for me to learn how to do business and be happy in Nigeria and then other countries is to learn how to unlearn many things and then listen and appreciate things being done in a different way. There's a sweet spot between accepting everything and trying to change everything.
Right.
Yeah.
It's I think it's like appreciation almost. It's you know, we spent a few years in the Middle East, and the idea that the frustration that I would feel on how they would do something, I would say that is the most dysfunctional, inefficient way to do this. But amazingly, they were very adept at fixing things. They were very adept at fixing the issue that was at hand. That, you know, I mean, they could come up with about anything, you know, to fix the issue. And I would be just frustrated because, I mean, I have one way that I'm thinking this needs to be done, but then I can't find that part. And they're like, well, we'll just make it, you know, we'll manufacture that, you know. So it is amazing how industrious and how, you know, utilitarian people can be when faced with, you know, issues and sometimes even lack of resources. But as I was looking at your book a little bit, and the whole idea of Africa, you know, people think of Africa kind of as a unit. But you know, you mentioned it just a minute ago. I mean, North Africa versus Sub-Saharan Africa versus South Africa versus Eastern Africa versus the Western French-speaking Africa. I mean, there's so much diversity on that one continent, and so many resources and so much life, you know, there. That I'm interested. How did you choose, you know, to focus on Africa? Other than that, I guess this tech company came to you and said, "Hey, we want you to do that," or were you already thinking that beforehand?
Yeah, so that's a funny story actually, because when we started the conversation about me joining the team, we assumed that we're going to launch in Egypt, and I was like, Egypt, pyramids, nice kite surfing spots, I'm down. And then by the time we agreed on everything, they told me, and they didn't tell me why, but they told me we're going to start in Nigeria. And I remember me being born and raised in Poland, we're pretty ignorant towards Africa. And I think it's the same thing in the US. I've learned only two things about the history of Africa in my high school, which is, you know, the Europeans kind of colonized Africa and they decolonized it. And probably the way they decolonized it was even worse than the way they colonized it, because they left them with those internal conflicts, divide and conquer, etc., etc. And countries are still paying the price for that decolonization. So when when he told me you're going to Nigeria, then I simply had to Google Nigeria, and then Google tells you two things about Nigeria. There's some Nigerian prince that has some money for me. He wants to send me $1 million. I just have to give him my credit card number. And then there's Boko Haram. They're terrorists, and that's basically all you say. And then it's tricky not to become the victim of the stereotypes and the common knowledge. Sure. But then you get deeper, and then you realize, Nigeria has 7 out of 10 countries in 2012 were the fastest growing economies in the world. The banking system was way more advanced than the European one. The telecommunication in the city, there was 4G. The internet was faster than in San Francisco, I remember. a lot of different contrasts, and you realize that there's huge potential for business, and you go after Nigeria because out of all the African countries, if I need to generalize, Nigeria represents the biggest potential. It's the most populous country. It's 200 million already. It's going to be way more. Biggest or second biggest economy in the whole continent, depending on who counts. And then there's this also saying, if something can go wrong, it will most likely go in Nigeria. So if you can crack the market in Nigeria, if you can find a sustainable business model, then potentially going to any other country will be easier. That's one way to go about it.
When you're looking at the different economies in Africa, I mean, when you would look at, I could look at, say, Nigeria versus Kenya and see a lot of similarities in how business is done and how the bureaucracy works and things like that. But they're actually vastly different.
Yeah.
So kind of touch on that a little bit. I mean, like, so if you made a go of it in Nigeria and then you wanted to transfer that to Kenya, what would be some of the things that you would have to kind of figure out or overcome to make that transition?
Yeah, and for me, Nigeria and Kenya couldn't be even farther from each other. When you look at the sub-Saharan belt. When because we had an office in Lagos, we had an office in Nairobi and Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, Tanzania, Rwanda, a couple other countries. And I remember hiring salespeople. This really is a great example of the differences. We had salespeople, they were responsible for signing up hotels, convincing them to be put on our platform. We were able to find them clients, send them clients, and get our commission. In Nigeria, all our sales guys were not paid any base salary. They were only paid based on the result, how many hotels they were able to convince to work with us. And from that commission, they had to pay their own transport costs, laptop and laptop and the phone. And we had so many people wanted to work for us because everyone wanted to hustle to make money. They will make more sales. They will make more money. Well, in Kenya, that model didn't work at all. We couldn't find anyone to work with. So we had to introduce, basic salary, but also be way more we had to micromanage them way more into what our sales guys are doing hour by hour because their incentives are much different. So that's an example that when you run a business, even those two countries which on the outside may look similar have all those nitty-gritty differences. When you look at Africa, when you zoom out, then obviously you have the north part of the continent, which has a lot of Arabic influences like Egypt or Libya, and then you have Morocco, Algeria, which is a lot of European influences a lot, especially because how close they are.
Right.
Then you have the sub-Saharan Africa, which you can divide into west and east. And then on the south, you go to South Africa, which is again a totally different country because the apartheid government, which we know what they did, has done one good thing, which is they really, although being a racist government, they have really invested heavily into infrastructure. So this country has been one of the richest countries in the world, like 30 years ago. We know what was the price of it, but you can still benefit from that infrastructure.
Right.
Like properly working courts, highways everywhere, cheap internet, so on and so on, which is a big challenge in the sub-Saharan African belt. Sure. So from Nigeria east to Kenya.
Even the power grid.
It's like power. That's another issue. It's like what's the word with Alice in Wonderland? The deeper you get in analyzing those countries, the more issues you have to touch.
Further down the rabbit hole. Exactly.
That's down the rabbit hole. Yeah. What I always try to use to visualize the differences is that in Europe or in the States, you would consider having running water and electricity 24/7 as something which is basic. Everyone, being representative of middle class or even lower income, most likely you have that in the house. Where, for example, having your own driver or a cleaner to take care of your house and maybe cook dinner for you and your family is considered for those, really rich people that want to afford this. Because, life is way more comfortable in the US or in Europe. There's so many services, everything just works. Where in Africa, much, much poorer, I mean, even middle-class families, if I can use that term, have someone to help them in the house or a driver that takes you from one place to another, because there's so many unemployed people who will work for almost nothing, like $100, $200 per month. But then in order to live in a flat where you have 24/7 electricity, running water and internet connection, you're going to pay thousands of dollars per month as a premium just to have that. So everything is like totally turnaround.
Yeah. So walk us through. So I'm assuming you're no longer directly involved in this enterprise in Africa. So what are you doing today?
Yeah. So last 2 years were really, really interesting for me because I was still fighting for my freedom. Essentially, I was involved in this big e-commerce company. We have made this. Yeah, I've been like part of making the company going public. Then I launched my own software company, and that's where I took a local partner to help me with this business, a so-called godfather, to protect you from the bad guys from the government, as you do in exotic countries. What no one tells you is that sometimes godfather wants to run the business without you. And essentially, everything is described in a book. But long story short, I got an offer I couldn't refuse. They bribed the Nigerian police. The Nigerian police issued an international arrest warrant that was put into the Interpol system. And after this was done, and I was essentially in house arrest in Poland, I was about to be extradited to Nigeria because apparently I was supposed to face jail time of 21 years for some, financial high-scale crimes that they've put in the arrest warrant. And then I got a phone call with an offer I couldn't refuse. If you're gonna basically give back the company, release everything for like a symbolic amount, then everything will disappear and we just go our ways. And I decided that I would go the hard way to fight this. And took me almost 2 years. Cases in Nigerian courts, cases in France, because that's where there's the HQ of Interpol. Also cases in Poland where I had to defend myself from being forcefully extradited to Nigeria. Scenes from criminal movies where I had to have a plaque that would record a conversation to collect evidence. So that was my job for the last 2 years, because fighting for freedom is essentially a job. And writing a book, because that was my biggest motivation. If I get out of this alive and well, my book has a nice happy ending, maybe this will be an interesting story. So everything.
Spoiler alert.
My last year. Spoiler alert, yeah.
Yeah, spoiler alert right here, yeah.
So
the book has a happy ending. That's right.
As a happy ending, yeah. So the book was published in Poland. Now it's published in the US market. So I guess I'll take a couple more months to be laid back business-wise. I have one company. It's an AI marketing company, which we operate in South Africa and Kenya. That is my business that allowed me to, not to lose all my savings because lawyers are super expensive.
Right.
But a couple more months, I'm just taking my time to enjoy the book promotion, telling my story, telling that although everything that happened to me, I'm still totally in love with Africa, and I would never trade all my experiences for anything else because of how, a lot of learnings I got out of this. And once this is over, I am an entrepreneur in my blood, and I'm definitely going to come back to running another company. What it's going to be, no idea. I'm looking at renewables and solar sector. Looks like Tesla is doing a lot of cool things with their roofs, and it seems like the world needs their competitor.
No doubt
there's no one
about
that
it.
will globally compete with them.
No doubt about it. So after the book tour, whatever. So, are you looking to do this in the African subcontinent, or are you looking to do this in Western Europe? Or, I know now we're online, so it doesn't really matter where we are. But where do you want to focus these new enterprises?
Seems that the global mega trends are everywhere. The most important global trend that makes a difference now is that the technology has really become much, much, much cheaper, like 10 times cheaper than a couple of years ago. And the unit economics start to make sense. And then it seems that finally the whole awareness of climate changes and maybe wanting to have greener energy that powers your house and your car is finally getting into mainstream. And also, you don't want to lose out on that potential in the so-called first world, so Europe and the United States, when there's many people that just want to drive an electric car and want to make sure that this electric car is not fueled by coal, but is actually the energy is coming from something green. But then you don't want to also miss the African opportunity where everyone needs solar as well or renewables as well, not because maybe they're necessarily climate conscious, but there is no alternative because the power grid was never properly developed.
Right.
In Nigeria, 70% of the country's consumption of power still comes from this classic small fuel power generator. I mean, small for a small flat or the size of a container for a big office building. And it's crazy. It shouldn't be like this. So that's the problem of emerging markets. The power from the grid is just not reliable. So the client will be different. The motivations of the client will be different, but seems that the technology can be applicable both in the first, quote unquote, and third world, just for different reasons. I don't see being able to have your own personal nuclear power plant in your house. I don't see really an efficient, was the power plant that gets energy from wind.
Yeah, like just wind power. Yeah, like a turbine.
Yeah, it's really hard to turbine. Yeah, it's right now the technology is not there. It doesn't seem to have a turbine that doesn't affect the way your house looks like, etc. But it is doable with the solar technology, where you can just emit the solar parts into the house that you're building, and you may not even see that they exist on the outside.
Let me ask you about solar really power. Like, yeah. So, you hear people talk about wind power, you hear them talk about solar power. Those are kind of the two biggest like renewables. So tell me why, and it makes perfect sense in a climate, like sub-Saharan Africa that has sunlight 340 days a year, So tell me why that hasn't already taken off. Is it the technology's not there? Is it's just not we just can't make it sustainable? The cost benefit analysis, why hasn't it already taken off, I guess?
Yeah, so the sustainability is the issue, but the issue of lack of sustainability is the technology cost, because both wind and solar are intermittent sources of energy. They don't provide you energy all the time. Solar only during the day and wind only when it's windy. And the battery costs was always the most expensive part of it. The solar panel parts the cost have gone down dramatically. Now it's like less than $1 for a kilowatt. But batteries also, the prices went down, but the current technology doesn't even allow you to go down even more. It's still too expensive. So now we have those lithium batteries or something like that. You can't really squeeze much more efficiency out of them. You have to go and search for totally different technology to do it. And with intermittent sources of power, if you're building a house and you just spend, I don't know, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 on a nice solar roof, and then you have to spend $6,000 just on a battery, it really kills the concept.
Right.
So that was always the issue. They're intermittent. They don't provide constant energy, and the storage is expensive. So that's the missing piece that really allows this to take off.
So what's happening in that space? I mean, are you seeing some real advances and some real improvements in the storage capacity for solar?
So the good thing in so-called first world markets is that the legislations are changing. And what happens is that once you produce power during the day, and usually you produce more than you're using, because when you have a house, you spend most of your power in the evening when you're back from work, then you can kind of get back that power from the grid. So you're giving the power over production during the day, and then you get it back from the grid. Right. So it allows you to work with the grid or even sell to someone, depending on the legislation. Then obviously, on the battery side, and I'm not an engineer, I'm the business guy. You need to have my chief engineering officer in the podcast. But there is a lot of research and development going around finding different type of chemicals which are more efficient in storing energy, like some kind of gels and other stuff. I don't even know the English words for it. So everyone is pretty optimistic that in the next 2 to 5 years, there will be some breakthrough and the price will go down eventually. because that's the missing part. So if you have now all the minds really focusing on bringing the power of storage down, and it is important everywhere for electric cars, even for our smartphones, for everything, then we're going to come up with a solution sooner or later.
Right. Yeah, I am confident you're right, because I mean, I can see just the advances. I mean, it's not a perfect, comparison, but if you look at computer storage, over the years, every, what is it, what's that law that talks about like
Moore's
every
law,
18 months, like
yeah.
the storage capacity halves or doubles. Or whatever that is. So
Yeah.
I can see that maybe that has a similar application, once we hit that critical mass or that tipping point, with solar storage. But I hope that's coming one day, because I mean, I love the whole concept behind, the solar energy, and especially in climates that have a lot of sunlight. It's like a wasted resource almost that we're losing. But it's interesting.
Totally.
It's a good segue right now, because we've talked about kind of renewable energy, but I want to talk a little bit about like the whole thing we're facing globally, this coronavirus, COVID-19. So speak to our listeners as a founder, as a tech founder, as a company leader. Just give us one or two things that you think would be really helpful as a company leader, as a CEO, as a founder, to help your team really navigate this difficult time right now. Just kind of leave us with a little hope here.
Yeah. So, for me, I have a different approach because I've already went through a crisis, 2008, and I was in finance sector. For us, it was our Corona. Because it really destroyed the finance sector. And after you reach another problem and another crisis, you just you see the methodology behind living in a capitalistic system, which has a lot of upsides, but then also has a lot of downsides. And I think the first thing is to go back in history and look how history likes to repeat itself. When I was in high school, I was all about mathematics and physics. I hate history. When I got into business, I fell in love with biographies and with history books, because learning about the history made me make better decisions, allowed me to look more in the long term in the past, and then look more in the long term into the future. And once you understand that this is a part of a process, then you're able to, first of all, calm yourself down. From the technical point of view, we were waiting. I mean, the markets were bound to crash anyway, because we had the longest bull run, I think, ever, or since like many decades. So this would happen anyway. It just Corona happened right now. I think crisis, definitely there are two problems or challenges about crisis. Is that it definitely accumulates power into the smaller number of companies or brands which just have more cash issues, cash flows, etc. And smaller companies tend to die faster because they're usually way more cash restricted. So you got to watch out for that. You can't just save everyone. On the other hand, definitely crisis accelerates some things. Now people are turning into video conferencing, e-commerce. You should, as a technology business, we should all benefit from it. But there are two buts. First of all, how long does this lockdown needs to happen for you to have that new habit that you're forced to stick to really stay with you? There's this book, Power of Habit, which talks about it. Because if the lockdown is only for 3 weeks, people will probably go down to their lives. So you want to have the lockdown longer, but then the lockdown will destroy the whole economy. So what's the point of your piece of the pie becoming bigger if the whole pie has shrunk? So that's my observation. Definitely people will change their paradigm about talking about business. I used to be in online travel business, and I would have conversations with hoteliers. They would say people will always love to travel. I would have conversations with restaurant owners. People will always eat. My business is safe. Not so much. So definitely you want to diversify your risk. And then the last thing, which is my observation, is that this is the crisis that was really created by everyone agreeing we will stop working at once. You used to have crisis with some, there was a war and it was totally destroyed. And the crisis was really damaged our economically, physically, and we just now all collectively stopped working, stopped creating wealth. So it's all in our psychology, really, right? Because we're staying at home, we're not spending as much money as we used to. Obviously, we still have to pay our rent, etc. And theoretically, we really take care about start pushing the positive message into the markets. Hey guys, we're done. Now it's time to get back to work. Then we have a chance to really recover. I'm going to use an example of the Marshall Plan after Second World War in Europe, where Europe was totally destroyed. Like nothing was there. And then the United States have been pushing billions of dollars. I think it was still one of the biggest stimulus plan ever into Europe. And everyone in Europe really wanted to forget about this horror of Second World War. And the money was really spent efficiently. Europe rebuilt itself, Western Europe especially, not this post-Soviet bloc, the communist bloc. And Europe has become stronger than ever, at least for many years. Now European Union has crisis, but we had a great, 5 decades of growth that was really accelerated by the rebuild phase. And as long as we have the right mindset, I'm not talking about mindset of one entrepreneur, but you have to push that mindset down into your team and then into the market and everyone around that. Guys, this is a new reality. The worst part is over. Now we're going back to work. This can be contagious as well, just like the virus. And it should be easier to rebuild than anything else because no real physical damage is harmed besides obviously, lost a lot of potential value, et cetera, et cetera. That's how I see it.
Right. I mean, I love the analogy of the Marshall Plan. As you were saying that, I was thinking, okay, so what is the modern day equivalent to the Marshall Plan, that is going to come out of this on the backside? But it's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be, we're going to be different forever. I mean, we will never go back to the way it was, at the beginning of this year or at the end of 2019. But you're right. I think there will be improvements that will happen. There will be efficiencies that will be created out of this, by necessity. And it'll just be an interesting time to see moving forward. But I encourage our listeners to get his book. It's called Chasing Black Unicorns.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'll show it.
Absolutely. There we go. It kind of has like maybe Mark Wahlberg on the front there a little bit.
My graphic designer did a lot of job. Yeah.
It's available on Amazon and other marketplaces. I encourage you to get the book and read that.
Yeah.
But
if
close us out today, Marek, with words of wisdom.
Yeah. So if you don't mind me adding the whole revenue from this book and also any speaking engagements I have, thanks to this book, I'm actually being transferred into a charity. That everything is actually described on the website chasingblackunicorns.com. You can reach out to me there, read more about the book, my story, and also the charity. And you said that I should close with some kind of a wisdom, huh?
Yeah, close us with wisdom and tell people where to find you online. Yeah.
So like I said, Chasing Black Unicorns, all my social media handles are there because otherwise you don't want to pronounce my last name. It's too hard to say, to write it down, my name. I remember you asked me in this note before the call, like wisdom for people that are thinking about going into business. I always say, don't go into business too fast. If you think you have what it takes in order to be a successful entrepreneur, you really shouldn't hurry because you're always going to see opportunities people don't see. Doesn't matter how quickly you're going to enter, and your probability of success increases dramatically with age. Guys like Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey are outliers. They are not. They're not representing the rule, and it's much better to make mistakes when someone else pays for them, when you work for someone, because the problem with entrepreneurship is sometimes you're young, you enter the business too young, you make a mistake, you get yourself bankrupt, and you will be paying mistakes for that forever. That happened to me. Like I went from plus million to minus 1 million, and then I had 3 jobs. I was a bartender in 2 nightclubs during the evenings and weekends, and then trying to do a startup during the day. And I was extremely lucky that I was able to sell the startup and pay my debts. But in most cases, it doesn't happen. And if I can change anything in my life, most of the things I wouldn't change because they made who I am. But I know that I went into business too fast. If I worked for 2 or 3 years more for someone, I would not make the 80% of the mistakes that I've made later because I just didn't have that experience.
Well, what a great way to wrap this up, because I mean, obviously you are very much an entrepreneur. I mean, that's just who you are in your DNA, that
Yeah,
I can see that. But I really appreciate the way that you kind of wrap this up and said, okay, but yeah, but it needs to be done with wisdom. It needs to be
yeah,
done with a plan, with good strategy, and with good support around you, and all the things that will help you make be successful. But Marek, thanks again for just taking the time to chat today. And I mean, your story could go on and on. I could continue to ask you questions on and on and on, because there's so
yeah, yeah.
many things we could
It's
chase.
in the
But
book.
yeah, I want you to encourage people to get the book and read it, and kind of have more depth in the story. But just thank you for taking time today and just sharing with our audience, and just really doing your part to help all boats rise in a rising tide. Marek,
And
thanks
thanks so
again.
much. Thanks again for allowing me to share my story. I wanted to send you my book, and I was like, maybe he will also invite me. But I like the whole concept of educating about startups, and then you reach out to me, come on the show, and I was like wow, okay, let's do this. So thanks again. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe. Don't get Corona get you.
There you go. Hey, it's our
Bye-bye.
pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks again, Marek.
Another episode in the books. We hope you heard some great takeaways. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review on iTunes and YouTube. As always, thanks for listening to Rising Tide.